Hola, me llamo Eddie. Yo tengo 15 años. Quiero aprender español porque quiero aprender más palabras.
Hola, me llamo Eddie, tengo 15 años, vivo en Holanda.
¿Cómo te llamas?
Pues lo primero, me llamo Eduardo, pues y tengo 15 años. Toda la gente tenía los diferentes vocabularios. Pues para mí me
Sí.
gusta jugar el Rocket League para aprender español, así que ya lo sé, las palabras del Rocket League. Me gusta ir al gimnasio, ya lo sé, las palabras y el gimnasio. Pues sí, ya lo sé, toda la gente tiene diferentes formas de vocabulario. Sí,
Sí,
todo el mundo sabe que no es una forma buena de aprender español porque es un español de América y quiero aprender español de España, de Andalucía, y no es buena para mí. Estaba en YouTube, estaba viendo los vídeos y un momento he encontrado tu vídeo de aprender español, ¿no?
sí.
Así que he usado tu método de aprender español. Estaba haciendo esto y por eso mi nivel ha subido B1. Cuando estaba usando el transcripción en TPL y otras de tus métodos de aprender español, mi nivel es mucho mejor que antes.
In this video, we're going to talk about my client, Eduardo, who made an insane Spanish transformation. But first, if you don't know me, my name is Hamid. I'm 16 years old and I became a polyglot after learning Spanish after the summer of 2022 in just 120 hours of studying. Here's my transformation.
Hola, estoy comiendo comida. Podré comprender shows de español. Para mejorar mi español cuando no tengo mucho tiempo libre para estudiar español, voy a, voy a hablar español cuando tengo tiempo libre, pero no sé, no como en serio.
Y pues ahora hablo con fluidez y mi español ha mejorado mucho. Y bueno, voy a conversar con los activos y hablar de cualquier cosa. And according to an AI analysis of his transformation, before he was at an A1 level, and after he was at a B2, which was actually more impressive than my own transformation, which according to AI was A1 to B1. Though I spent only 120 hours studying, and he said he gave a range of 300 to 400. Now, this means that he saved 200 to 350 hours of studying compared to the average learner. Now, not just saying all this, I actually had an interview with him. So I'm going to play that now. Most of the interview was in Spanish because, of course, that's the language that he learned. And after a video, I'm going to go through exactly what he did, what I sort of coached him in. So, firstly, I met him at around the beginning of January or almost beginning of February. Was it January or February? I think it was around January, February when we had our first call. And that's the call that you saw in the transformation video that you saw. And then a few months later, this is the call that I had with him. So I'm going to play a call right now.
Yo,
What's up? How do you find my channel and stuff?
yeah, it's interesting. Well, first of all, you give like the basics for like a beginner and then for intermediate.
When do you start learning Spanish?
I started in September. Hola, me llamo Eddie, tengo 15 años, vivo en Holanda. Quiero jugar videojuegos como el Rocket League, Fortnite, o Minecraft, pero me gusta viendo juegos, no sé, pero me gusta jugar en Minecraft y con mi móvil me gusta hablar sobre Minecraft en un videos en mi móvil para de 10 minutos y entonces mirad en mi móvil.
Hola, me llamo Eddie. Yo tengo 15 años. Vivo en Irlanda. Yo aprendo español. Hablo un poco español. Quiero aprender español porque quiero aprender más palabras. Yo tengo 2 hermanos y una hermana.
¿Cómo te llamas?
Pues lo primero, me llamo Eduardo, pues, y tengo 15 años. Bueno, pues el verano pasado me fui a España con mi familia para ver su cultura y la comida también, pero me fui a España porque no hay sol en Irlanda y quiero tener sol. Me pareció que el idioma es muy bien, así que por eso he perdido todo de mi tiempo para hablar y aprender español. He perdido,
Un montón de tiempo, ¿sí? Aprendiendo.
sí, he perdido mi vida como 9 meses de aprender español. Pues mira, empecé a aprender español en agosto con Duolingo porque toda la gente que quiere aprender español usa Duolingo. Es muy común. Pues todo el mundo sabe que no son formas buenas de aprender español porque son español de América. Y quiero aprender español de España, de Andalucía, y no es buena para mí. Estaba en YouTube, estaba viendo los vídeos y un momento he encontrado tu vídeo de aprender español, ¿no?
Sí.
Así que he usado tu método de aprender español. Estaba haciendo esto y por eso mi nivel ha subido B1.
Sí. Y pues, antes de encontrar el método y hablar conmigo,
Ujú.
dijiste que has como pasado mucho tiempo haciendo el como Duolingo y practicando con Duolingo y esas cosas. Y bueno, cuando yo hablaba contigo como por un rato en la llamada, me dijiste como que antes has usado como language transfer por un rato y luego te di como creo que sí, mi curso de fundamentales. ¿Y seguiste con como estudiar mi curso o seguiste con language transfer o los dos?
Pues he usado los dos
Ah,
porque también no entiendo language transfer. Así que vi tus vídeos de hacerlo y entonces he usado language transfer también.
pero cuando empezaste a ver mi curso, ¿cómo te pareció eso?
Pues lo primero es lo mismo language transfer, pero es muy corto, es muy
Sí, como rápido, más corto.
largo, no es largo. Y el language transfer es 90 de estos podcasts. Y tú ya solo los 12 vídeos.
Ujú.
Y no quiero perder mi tiempo. Quiero ir al gimnasio, quiero hacer mi cosa, como mi tarea, los
Sí,
deberes. No quiero perder mi tiempo, ¿no?
sí,
Pero
entonces es
sí,
más
es muy
fácil
bien.
y más rápido, ¿te parece, sí?
Sí, es la verdad.
Y
Sí.
bueno, ese es como el objetivo que tenía cuando estaba como grabando los videos y grabando el
Sí.
curso. Bueno, así que después de como aprender la gramática y como aprender a hacer como mi curso, empezaste a hacer el transcript training, ¿sí?
Oh, sí, esta es verdad. Es como cuando no he usado tu método de aprender español, solo estaba viendo los vídeos, vídeo tras vídeo, no estaba haciendo nada, solo viendo. Necesito saber las palabras, todas las palabras de un nativo, de una película. Estaba haciendo con un vídeo de 1 hora y
Ujú.
ya lo sé todas las palabras en el vídeo, ¿no? Es muy bueno.
Y bueno, ¿cómo te pareció como el ejercicio de transcript training?
Pues creo que es muy bien porque antes de hacer esto no entiendo nada porque en España es mucho slang, ¿no?
Sí, sí, hay
Y no
mucho slang y
entiendo,
esas cosas, sí.
sí, muchos
Mucha jerga se
sí,
dice en español.
tergas, sí, pero no entiendo muchas antes, pero ahora entiendo todo porque la gente en diferentes partes de España dice algunas cosas y
Sí.
sonido diferentes, muy bien.
Así que usaste como una película de España o como videos en YouTube o Como,
Sí, sí, siempre. No tengo mucho dinero, así que necesito usar mis aplicaciones en mi móvil, como YouTube. Es una película que estaba hablando con mi amigo de Andalucía
mm,
y mi amigo me ha dicho, tienes que usar esto. Es muy bueno, me gusta mucho, así que estoy usando la película. No sé cómo se llama porque,
sí,
pero se me
sí.
olvidó.
Bueno, pero después de eso, así que seguiste a hacer el Transcript Training y después de
Ujú.
esto empezaste a hablar, ¿sí? ¿O qué hiciste? Después de, o sea, estabas haciendo el Transcript Training y
Ujú.
luego empezaste a hacer, te dije hacer como el Narrate, contemplate para practicar a hablar.
Sí.
Pero supongo que empezaste con eso y luego empezaste a conversar con los nativos, o sea, hablar con los nativos.
Sí, sí, esto es muy importante, ¿no? Si quieres hablar con una persona, tienes que, no sé, escribir el texto antes de hablar con la persona, ¿no?
Mm.
Y es muy difícil, pues ya lo sé, es muy difícil, así que es una forma divertida de aprender español, pero no es divertida. Tienes que hacerlo para hablar con la gente, así que he escrito muchos frases, muchas historias en español, el castellano también, pero sin esto no puedes hablar español. Tienes que pensar las frases en tu
Mm.
mente, en tu mentalidad, siempre. Si no tienes las frases, no puedes hablar.
Sí, y bueno, así que estabas como escribiendo o como hablando, o los dos, o sea, ¿qué te pareció?
Dos, siempre los dos.
Y cuando
Porque
estabas escribiendo, ¿estabas haciendo con el transcript training o como, explícame como lo que estabas haciendo en específico?
me siento es una forma muy bien de aprender español porque, no sé, tío.
Sí, pues, pues he explicado mucho en mi canal por qué es efectivo,
Sí,
o sea, por qué funciona muy bien, pero lo que me interesa de tu historia es que me dices que has como pasado como un rato de tiempo escribiendo,
sí,
que es algo más distinto, o sea, escribir no es algo que yo digo mucho, o sea, porque yo digo que es más importante como ver, pero al mismo tiempo sí es como importante escribir, pero solo como haciendo el transcript training. Así que me interesa saber cómo, o sea, cómo escribiste, o sea, qué hiciste, cómo has escrito como textos, como mandar mensajes, o sea, como hay muchas formas de escribir, ¿sí? Estabas como escribiendo como un texto, o sea, o mandar mensajes, o sea, ¿qué estabas haciendo en específico de cómo escribir? ¿Me entiendes?
sí, entiendo perfectamente. Pues, a ver, es como puedo escribir de lo que voy a hablar con la gente.
Ah, sí.
Solo voy a escribir si después de escribir voy a hablar con la gente de lo que he escrito en la frase. No sé, entiendes, pero
Bueno, entiendo que tú me estás diciendo que antes de tener una conversación, que
ujú.
has que escribes como unas frases sobre el tema, ¿sí?
Sí, sí, exactamente, sí.
Bueno, y de esta forma como escribiendo usando el DeepL o solo escribiendo porque... o sea, escribiendo solamente o usando el DeepL, o sea, para traducir.
Oh, sí, DeepL, o sea, no olvido de esto. En serio, DeepL, estoy usando DeepL cada día,
Cada
¿no?
día. Y así que escribes como en DeepL antes
Ujú.
de tener tu conversación,
No.
¿no?
Sí, sí, no, he usado DeepL porque en los verbos, en las otras palabras, hay
Ujú.
otras formas de
O
esto.
conjugar, sí, conjugar.
Sí. He usado papel y DeepL también. Necesito usar
Mm.
DeepL y entonces voy a escribir en el papel porque
Ah,
DeepL.
ok. Así que tú me dices que estás usando el DeepL para traducir y luego, cuando has aprendido como como palabras del tema, luego escribes como las palabras, pero no para memorizar, pero para recortarte como el tema y como el vocabulario, ¿sí?
Sí, sí.
Es porque yo digo siempre que para memorizar no funciona. Es que hay que tener como pensamientos españoles, ¿sí?
Mm,
No como
mm.
pensamientos como en inglés que se traducen al español, ¿sí?
Ujú.
Así que, bueno, eso es muy increíble porque, bueno, yo no te dije eso, pero que lo hiciste como por tu propia cuenta. Es como
Ujú.
increíble porque, bueno, es como algo que yo también estaba haciendo en el verano de 2022.
Sí, sí.
Porque, o sea, no estaba escribiendo como el tema, pero lo que hice es que tenía como el traductor, como el DeepL, como en mi teléfono, y estaba como si quería hablar de como un tema en específico, entonces estaba como escribiendo como, esta palabra, por ejemplo, si vamos a hablar de aprendizaje del español, entonces me
Ujú.
gustaría saber la palabra nativo, por ejemplo, ¿sí?
Mm.
Porque nativo, ¿sí? Y bueno, así que tenía como el tema de aprender español y había como muchas palabras sobre el tema. Y
Ujú.
parece que tú has hecho el mismo, ¿no?
Sí, sí.
O sea, digo que tienes como el tema y como vocabulario sobre el tema enfrente de
Sí,
ti mismo para que puedas
entiendo.
recordar como el vocabulario y como el tema para que puedas tener la conversación.
Sí,
Y es
serio.
como entiendo como lo que hiciste.
Sí, sí, pues para mí toda la gente tenía los diferentes vocabularios. Pues para mí me
Sí.
gusta jugar el Rocket League para aprender español, así que ya lo sé, las palabras del Rocket League. Me gusta ir al gimnasio, ya lo sé, las
Ujú.
palabras y el gimnasio. Pues sí, ya lo sé, toda la gente tiene diferentes formas de vocabulario. Sí, me
Sí,
has dicho.
sí. Así que después de hacer esto, supongo que empezaste a tener conversaciones con los nativos, ¿sí?
Sí, 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 sí.
Sí. Bueno, empezaste a tener más conversaciones con nativos.
Sí, sí, puedo tener las conversaciones con los nativos
Mm,
porque me acuerdo de que ya lo sé muchas palabras en español.
mm.
Pues tienes que saber las palabras, los millones de palabras antes de hablar con la gente, pero si estás escribiendo el texto antes de hablar con la gente es muy fácil. Y para mí me gusta hablar muy rápido. Cuando hablo y cuando estoy hablando muy rápido me siento que soy un nativo de
Sí,
España.
sí, es que yo tampoco, y lo que me interesa de eso es que cuando hablas con nativos, tu acento es como, tu acento imita su acento. Sí, porque es como, hablas como o sea, hablas como los nativos porque estás hablando con los nativos. Y es como, tu español se parece a su español, ¿sí? Así
Sí.
que, y por eso digo que el transcript training ayuda mucho. Así que ahora no tienes que como leer, o sea, tener el texto enfrente de ti mismo.
No, no necesito esto. Es como en el pasado, cuando estaba usando el transcripción en TPL y otros de tus métodos de aprender español, mi nivel es mucho mejor que antes. Es
Mm,
porque, no sé, es muy buena. Pues
sí,
me has dicho que tienes que pensar en tu mentalidad, en tu cabeza, así que es muy buena. Ya sabes cómo la palabra está todavía en la cabeza. No
mm,
tienes que tener el papel en la pared diciendo tienes que hablar eso. Ya lo sé, tengo las palabras en mi cabeza y language transfer y transcript training es
ujú.
muy bien, ¿no?
Sí,
Mira,
sí, bueno, así que tú eres como una prueba como mostrando que el método realmente funciona, no
sí,
solo
sí,
para mí, pero a ti tampoco. Así que tú tienes 5 años, ¿sí?
quinto año, sí.
Sí.
Well, no, I actually started in September, I think.
September,
Yeah,
yeah?
like yeah, September. And I literally just took down notes. I every single day that was 6 hours a day for 3 months. And then I used your method in like January. And then all I was doing was transcript training and then talking to natives. Because I realized talking is so much more important
Mm-hmm.
than writing. So I
Definitely.
completely just focused on talking and transcript training and then I just got basically B2 level, I think. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
fluent
okay, let's
basically.
see I think 300 hours of Spanish, 400 hours.
From September to January, how much would you say you did then?
No, like probably 5 to 6 hours because I actually locked in, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so you spent around 750 hours before, and
Mhm.
your Spanish stayed the same,
Yeah.
doing basically dreaming Spanish. And what else did you do? Duolingo?
Duolingo, yeah, basically.
Duolingo, you said dreaming Spanish.
Yeah.
And what else? Like,
I was writing stories, but didn't really help me because I was always to talk to people. So.
So you weren't speaking, you were just writing, and therefore your Spanish didn't improve much.
No, no speaking. When I was in Spain, obviously, I went with my family, like I was saying, and I met this guy playing volleyball with him, and we just at the ping pong table, just speaking. You told me I need to have a conversation, so I made myself. I have to have a conversation. So I just had 10 minutes just talking about the most just bad words, and he's telling me like a lot of words that I just didn't understand.
Wait, so then now compared to then, how do you feel about like your conversation ability then?
It is so much better. I can actually speak to native now. I know like the words are just already in my head. So the actual problem is me trying to speak as fast as the words in my head. It's not even the words aren't in my head. It's just my body can't say them fast enough. Yeah, I think that's it. It's a lot easier now because before, I don't have to talk to these people. I don't want to do it. It was actually just a chore, but now it's kind of fun because and it makes me happy that I'm doing something that I can speak 2 languages. Do you know?
Yeah, no, it's crazy. And the fact that it's like, this is also something crazy, especially for our age, right? So I'm 16, right? We are basically able to speak Spanish fluently for the rest of our lives. Like, think about how sick that is. We literally have a second language unlocked, one of the most popular languages in the world. And you can literally like just walk up to a Spanish person, have a conversation in Spanish, and then leave. Do you know what I mean? For the rest of your life. Like all because of doing the right things for a good amount of time, right? Do you definitely think that this was then worth it then?
No, it's definitely worth it because I realized that I was just wasting my time because watching just random video was not going to help me. Like I'm just going to forget the word later. But actually studying the video and understanding an hour of like a movie, then it's just so much easier.
Yeah. And so far you've done 1 hour of transcript training, right? Up until now. Or do you
yeah, I'd say maybe 2.
Maybe 2. That's actually really interesting because my range that I give for like becoming fluent or conversationally fluent, right now you're objectively conversationally fluent. Es que podemos seguir hablando en español ahora mismo. Y sí, bueno, no tenemos que hacerlo, pero bueno, we're going to speak in English still, but it's the fact that we can just switch to Spanish like that. Do you get it? And we're not native. We're just some kids studying Spanish using like the correct methods. It's insane. But so the reason why I found that interesting is because my range I gave was 1 to 3 hours of transcript training is how much it takes to get to conversational level. And so you would say that your hours of transcript training fits into that range, no?
Yeah, obviously.
Yeah, perfect. That also confirms that sort of theory. The reason why is because my own experience learning it was also kind of like that. Did you have any prior knowledge to Spanish before?
No, I knew nothing. I was literally asking people, what is a 1 to 10? I'll mess up on 1. Like,
yeah. So, and also, so you've now traveled to Spain, or not Spain. Yeah, it's traveled to Spain, Sevilla.
And when I'm playing Rocket League, I think my mom just comes into my room. Why? How can you speak Spanish so well? Like they're just so confused. How did you do this in such small amount of time? And yeah, they support me as well because like it's good to learn a new language.
Of course. What is like the best experience you've had with speaking a native? Has anyone been like shocked or?
No, they've been shocked because even Spanish natives, they think, how are you speaking so well? You're not even from here. Like they just get so confused because they know people that are like learning Spanish 5 years, right? And they have the most shocking gringo accent I've ever heard. But just leave. Like they can't even pronounce the 5 L sounds.
What do you tell them about like what you did to learn like Spanish?
I obviously told them your method.
Have you ever gotten like people saying that you're like a genius or something, that you're really smart just because you like learned Spanish like that?
Well, yeah, they think I'm really smart. People are saying, you found what you like in life. Now just do Spanish. You're really smart. There's people that learn languages. There's people that are good at maths. But I think anyone can learn a language. People are just stupid.
They're not doing the right method, I think.
No, not doing the right method.
Because I don't think the probability that we're both geniuses is very high. There's probably no way that you and me are just both geniuses and we are just gifted in language learning. I think it's more probable that it's the method that is making the difference, not necessarily the brain.
No. I think I'm below average in IQ, so it's definitely not the brain.
So just real quick, before we cover the method that I put him through and that got him his results, I just want to say, if you are interested in learning Spanish using that method, then check the description of this video. Now, the concepts we're going to go through and the frameworks we're going to go through, we're going to go through Spanish versus real Spanish, then the fluency equation, then the learn and serve ladders, then transcript training, which you heard in the video, and then narrate, elaborate, contemplate, and then the 3 W's, and then finally spot and speak, which is what he was doing. So, I know it looks like a lot, but trust me, it's very simple. So, we'll start with Spanish versus real Spanish. Now, most people learn Spanish the conventional way of memorizing ABCs, flashcards, and Duolingo, which was the exact thing that I did not want Eduardo to go through. And this is the reason why most people didn't succeed. In fact, you saw in his transformation, he had spent upwards of like 6-7 hours a day or something every single day from like September all the way until he met me. And so that was around 700 hours or so. I don't remember the exact amount in the video, but hundreds of hours on that. And his Spanish was basically still at A1. Like after 700 hours of those methods, his Spanish was literally at the same level as before he started. And I know that because that was the first call we had. I asked him to speak some Spanish and you can see there's Spanish there. And it honestly pisses me off because we waste so much of our time on methods that just waste our time. And it's honestly sad. Now, you probably know this, but real world Spanish is different to what school has been teaching us all our lives. And we already know this sort of, okay? Because we know that real Spanish sounds much different than what the regular way of teaching, the sort of simulation of Spanish, I like to call it, teaches us. Let me ask you a question. How do Spaniards actually speak? Do they say, hola, me gusta hablar español, hola, yo hablo español? Or do they say, hola, hablo español? Or let's just have these words here. Aquí estoy, escúchame, es que hay muchos problemas, okay? I've given this example many times on my channel. A native would say, aquí estoy, escúchame, es que hay mucho problema. You see how they're sort of skipping letters and sounds, and with certain vowels, they're just smushing words together. And so real Spanish has correct vowels, like we mentioned as well, Eduardo. They have the different letters that are pronounced correctly. They speak faster, they drop letters, and they combine words, and they have their own accent. Now, Eduardo chose the Andalusian accent, which, granted, is a very good accent. His accent's actually very, very impressive. I would actually say his transformation is like on par with mine, if not a little more impressive than mine, which is insane, which also just proves how effective the method actually is. Now, the reason why is because when we learn our own native language, or languages if you're bilingual or trilingual like I am, were we slaughtered by real English or just English? Like, think about it. You don't say, I am wanting to learn English because I am very liking English, like with an Indian accent, and I'm not saying that to offend anyone. But the reason why you don't speak like that is because that isn't how your parents or your environment spoke, right? I'm from Stockholm, and in Stockholm specifically, the way we pronounce certain words is different than, let's say, Skåne, which is another place in Sweden. You might have seen this guy like online named Marlin, right? This guy, it's like a meme right now on TikTok where they make fun of his accent because the way he says like, she's cheeseburger, right? Now we would say cheeseburgare, but he says cheeseburger or something like that, okay? Or they would pronounce the R's like ch, so they say like midsommar for midsummer, or yeah, and we just say midsommar, we just say like that. And so the simple reason why is because I grew up in Stockholm, so of course I'm going to speak like that. Of course I'm going to say midsommar, right? And so the simple question is, if someone was to learn English to go to the US, would they study the Indian accent or the American accent? Of course, the American accent. And so if we want to learn fast, real Spanish, like the real world Spanish you hear, it's the Spanish that doesn't sound like the Spanish that you read, well then of course we're going to study that Spanish. We're not going to study, hola, me gusta hablar español. He estado aprendiendo español por mucho tiempo. That's not real Spanish. That's the simulation of Spanish. It's what you think is Spanish. It's what the Duolingo course makers have put into our minds and said that, okay, this is the way that you learn Spanish. And they've manipulated it by adding like the dink sound and the icon and the saturated colors that make you feel like you're making progress in Spanish, but it's just a simulation. It's a game. It's literally a game. Why do you think all these kids and these people are on Duolingo? Because it's a game. Like, think about it. You're studying Spanish. Like, of course, it's gamified, right? But it's a game. It's literally like the equivalent of like, you know, those Cocomelon kid games. It's the equivalent of that, where you match like letters and stuff. It's the equivalent of that. And so it makes no sense for us to study the non-native accent/speech because we don't want to learn it. And so simply, Spanish versus real Spanish is to say that when we're studying Spanish, we want to study and we want to prioritize real Spanish. Now let's talk about the fluency equation. This is the absolute key to getting fluent in Spanish fast using this method, okay? I remember the first time I thought of what fluency was, and there was tons of videos on it, but simply my definition of fluency, we'll start with the actual definition of fluency on like the Oxford dictionaries. Fluency is defined as being fluent. Okay, what is fluent, right? Being fluent is having fluidity when you speak. That is it. It's the flow, right? It's this wave of words that comes out of your mouth when you make sentences. Now, usually people define fluency as being able to speak effortlessly and articulately, but I don't think this is actually an accurate representation of fluency. And this is a controversial thing. Not many people agree with me on this. However, I don't think that fluency is being perfect in a language. I don't think that fluency is being able to speak and articulate yourself absolutely perfectly with zero mistakes and do it very articulately and effortlessly. I think that doesn't help us. And that honestly is probably worse because you actually don't care about that. You know, you and me, we care about the idea of being able to walk into a coffee shop and be able to speak Spanish with anyone. Go to Mexico or something and order in Spanish, for example. That's not the same as this, high standard of fluency that has been put upon us. So the best way to define fluency is to separate it into two categories. I call it conversational fluency and native fluency. Now, I define conversational fluency as being able to have a conversation in Spanish where both parties understand each other to the point where they can have a full conversation. Here's the key differentiator. The flow is not only in your speech, but it's in the conversation. It's in the back and forth. Okay? So this means that you can still be conversationally fluent even if you're not necessarily flowing a bunch of words out of your mouth and speaking fluently, because this is what we want, right? Of course, it's nice to also be able to speak fast and be able to blurb out a bunch of words. That isn't necessarily the first goal. Native fluency is where you're indistinguishable from a native. And so this means your accent is on point and you can do everything that a native can, basically. And so there's actually a difference. There's a discrepancy here between these two. And I find that this is the best way to define fluency. And this is how I showed it in Eduardo in our first call. In fact, this exact presentation is the presentation I went through with Eduardo on our first call. And that's when he learned all the methods and then implemented them. I also coached him through texting between, every week and every day. So the idea here is the goal is to reach conversational fluency, which is basically the level that I reached and Eduardo have reached after our sort of periods of studying. He reached around B1, B2, I would say maybe B2, right? And I reached around B1 at that point. Right now, I'm probably around B2, pushing the next level. I'm not sure. I haven't done any of the tests yet, but I haven't studied more than like 190 hours. Even though I studied way less than him, it's because I spent those 190 hours spread across several years. And of course, then your Spanish will improve much more. Now, this matters. This idea of being fluent in the context of conversations matters because of what I call the effort discrepancy. There is a discrepancy between this conversational fluency and native level fluency. And there's also a discrepancy between the results that you get and the time and effort that you put relative to which fluency you aim for. Meaning, if you wanted to reach conversational fluency, well then the amount of time and effort that you put in is so much less relative to the amount of results that you get. The amount of results you get from conversational fluency is absolutely insane. It is the biggest ROI thing that I think I've ever seen in my life. One summer of studying pretty consistently for just like 120 hours. And for Eduardo, it was a few months, 4 months studying consistently. And now I'm fluent for the rest of my life. And Eduardo is now also fluent in Spanish for the rest of his life. Think about how advantageous this is. Think about how insane this is. It's such high ROI, and not only being conversationally fluent, but like I remember I was able to walk into, in his story, he talked about when he saw these volleyball people and was able to talk about bad words in Spanish. And he was able to connect with natives, speak to some girl or something. And I've been able to, for example, walk into a gymnasium in Sweden, like a high school, and be able to speak with the Spanish teachers, all in Spanish, and just bust out a conversation just like that, which is so impressive, not only to the people around you, but it's also a way to connect with people. And that's the beautiful thing about language. And so native fluency is something that will take like so much more time and effort, and you'll basically only get a little more results. The results really mainly come from the fact that people are extra impressed. They think that your accent is so on point. But generally speaking, when you reach conversational fluency, that's the higher level. That is the better sort of results that you get. And so we want to prioritize conversational fluency. And so putting fluency into a formula or equation for both conversational and native fluency would be this exact formula. And this is absolute gold. This is what the entire Speedy Spanish Academy is sort of based on. It goes like this: speaking multiplied by understanding equals fluency. And let's add some more details. Speaking real Spanish and understanding real Spanish, audible Spanish, right, equals fluency. And this is because in the context of conversations, what are the two skills that is only happening in conversations? I speak, you understand my audible speech. we switch. You speak, and I'm trying to understand your audible speech. There's only 2 skills that are used. And so if you want to reach conversational fluency, it makes no sense to do anything but those 2 skills. And this is exactly how I taught Eduardo, and also how I taught in my fundamentals course and my transcript training course. Basically, this is exactly what I put Eduardo on. This exact equation. To add to this, Spanish sentences can be simplified to just grammar and vocabulary, meaning words and where the words are placed and how they are sort of conjugated and put together. Okay, the structure of the sentences. That's it. And that's what I discovered from using language transfer, which is what Eduardo also did. Eduardo used both my course and language transfer course. I recommend language transfer, but we're going to get to that now when we go to the 3 W's. And so the fastest, most effective way to get fluent is to prioritize only these 2 aspects. And so this is exactly what I put Eduardo on, this exact equation. And what the fluency equation looks like is what I call the Lorentz ladder. So the simple question is, the simplest way to improve the skills of speaking and understanding spoken Spanish is to simply do more of that, to speak and understand spoken Spanish. Very simple. You get better at what you do. If you want stronger abs, you should probably train your abs. You probably shouldn't be doing bicep curls to train your abs. Probably not. You probably shouldn't be doing Anki decks when you're trying to learn Spanish. Because is an Anki deck something you're going to experience in a conversation? No. But the fluency equation prioritizes every single part that you're going to experience in an interaction between a native speaker and yourself. And that is why getting fluent involves climbing what I call the Lorentz ladders, which is improving the skills of speaking and understanding. And they simply follow like this. To get better at understanding spoken Spanish, you have to listen to spoken Spanish, understand that spoken Spanish, and then repeat that. And that is what I call LER. Listen, understand, repeat. And to get better at speaking Spanish, you simply have to speak Spanish and understand how to say something in Spanish and then repeat those 2 steps. I call that SIR. And so these are all ladders that we climb. This is what they look like visually. We listen, understand, and we repeat over and over and over again. It's this ladder. And at the top of this ladder is fluency. And that is exactly what you saw in the beginning. This is not something I made up. I mean, I did make these ladders and I did create the fluency equation and the formula and all that. But here's the thing. Anytime anyone ever got fluent, no matter what, like in the history of the universe, in the history of the earth itself, anytime anyone ever got fluent in any language was through climbing these 2 ladders. Because fundamentally, you only get better at something by doing it more. And the only skills that are required in a conversation is speaking and understanding. Meaning, the only way to get fluent in any language, no matter what, is by climbing these 2 ladders. You, by definition, cannot, because these are the only 2 skills that you will experience in a conversation. Of course, it's nice to know how to read or write. And obviously, in Spanish reading and writing is so easy because it uses the same letters and it's very easy, right? But it doesn't make sense to study that because that's not climbing these ladders. That's not implementing fluency equation. That's not implementing conversations. And Eduardo knew this after I taught it to him. And that's why he would only prioritize the things that got him closer to those native interactions. So now we're going to talk about transcript training, which is the exercise that you also heard in that video. And this was one of the main exercises that I taught him. So transcript training is the exercise we're going to use to climb the ladder. And it follows 3 simple steps. Listen to spoken Spanish, understand spoken Spanish, and repeat those 2 steps. It's literally the exercise I use to climb the LER ladder. There are a million different ways to climb the LER ladder. There are many ways to listen to spoken Spanish, understand that spoken Spanish, and then repeat those 2 steps. There are millions of ways. I use something called transcript training. That is something that is what I use in the summer 2022. That is what I put Eduardo on, and both of us have seen incredible results. So it's probably something that you should be doing. And so I call this transcript training, and it's inspired from what I saw one of the YouTubers before the summer 2022 when I first got fluent doing. And it's heavily inspired from that. And that the YouTuber's name, I think, is Language Lords. You might have seen his video. So the first step is to listen, of course. The way I like to listen is to pick out native content, so real Spanish content that has accurate subtitles and transcripts. This way, I'm able to also use the transcripts and subtitles to understand, which is the next step. So simply picking out content. The next step is to understand that content, right? And so this transcript training exercise is mainly our vocabulary exercise, which means in order to understand the vocabulary, all I do is I translate using DeepL, and I focus on word for word translations in order to fully understand the sentence. To understand the grammar, I simply identify every single verb and put it into SpanishDict.com, which is a website where you can see all the conjugations. And I just simply quiz myself on every conjugation to learn the irregularities, okay? This way you're able to learn all the irregular verbs in Spanish without having to memorize them in the sense of on like a script. And we're going to get to why this isn't actually memorization. Because this exercise isn't actually the first exercise that I put him on. It was actually my fundamentals course and language transfer, which we're going to get to in the 3 W's. So make sure to watch to the end. Last step is to repeat. Now, once I've understood the sentence, all I do is I go back to before the sentence and listen to it again to see if I can understand it now. So you watch a piece of content and the native says something, you don't understand it the first time, you use the subtitles and you translate all the meanings and the verbs and the conjugations. Once you've understood all those, you go back and turn off the subtitles and see if you can understand it. Simply. And once you do understand it, boom, you can move on. And so this process of repetition is the most important step and is extremely long and it takes a long time. And so, but the goal is to repeat until you've understood everything. And in Eduardo's case, he said around 1 to 2 hours that he's understood, which in my range I've seen to get fluent is 1 to 3 hours, which I mentioned in the call, I think. Now, in the beginning, for me, this took over 30 minutes to get past 2 minutes of Spanish content, and I forgot most of it the next day, which is why consistency is the key with this exercise, which Eduardo did, which is why he got fluent. Of course. Next, we're going to go to narrate, elaborate, contemplate. This is also what we sort of mentioned in the call, right? So to get better at speaking, we have to speak Spanish, understand how to say something in Spanish, and repeat those 2 steps. Sir, right? And so there are millions of different ways of doing this. I like to do an exercise called narrate, elaborate, contemplate. The reason why is because this emulates a conversation. And this is exactly what I taught Eduardo to do in his free time. And what's interesting is he combined this with the last framework I'm going to teach you, spot and speak. And I actually didn't teach that to him. I taught him this, but he actually did that himself without me necessarily telling him that, which is great. And so I'm going to teach this to you now, which is exactly what Eduardo had been doing. So first step is to speak. How I like to speak is I like to do it in 3 steps. I like to narrate something, so tell a story, report to a recent event. I like to give details or to elaborate on those. And then I like to contemplate on that, simply. This is because this emulates a conversation and therefore follows the fluency equation very well. Now, in order to understand how to say something you don't know how to say, we're just going to use the same things as we did in transcript training because it's the same step. It's it's understand. The only difference is we're not going to quiz ourselves on every verb in SpanishDictionary.com because it's not really needed because we've already done that in transcript training. And the final step is to go back to saying the thing that we now know how to say. So let's say you didn't know how to say a certain sentence like, I walked my dog this morning. Then you learned how to say it by understanding it. And then now you go back and now actually say it in Spanish. And the thing is, this time you should be a lot more fluent in saying it because you just learned how to say it. And this exercise can be done 24/7, which is why it's such a high leverage exercise. And this is what I did on the side as like the background exercise to transcript training during my summer 2022. Now, we're going to get into the 3 W's, okay? This is what I taught Eduardo with the language transfer and in my own fundamentals course. So now all we need to do is speak and understand grammar since we haven't even started with that, right? If you started doing transcript training in narrate, elaborate, contemplate, you probably shouldn't have started with that. But instead, we want to start with grammar. And the reason why is because that's the base for everything. So most people find grammar extremely hard and excruciating. And the reason why is because they don't do this. And this is what I told Eduardo and why I put him on language transfer and my fundamentals course. In any Spanish sentence, there are only 2 parts. There are what the words are and where the words are placed, or sort of how the words are conjugated and formed. And most people memorize the what and the where, which is where the words are placed. So most people know como estás. They know the word como and estás, and they know that the como comes first and then estás comes. But this means that it won't make sense for them, right? Everyone knows that it's como estás, but they don't understand the why. And so that's why I said there's 3 W's. It's not just what and where, but you have to understand the why. Understanding the why is crucial because, let me ask you a question. Do you know why it's como estás? Do you know why we get there? Do you know that the rule is you take off the ar from adverbs and you put as? But in this case, it's an exception because the tilde is on the as instead of the beginning. And the reason for that is because if it wasn't, then it would be estas. And estas is another word in Spanish. And actually, estar is one word for to be, but ser is another word to be. And the difference between ser and estar is, do you get it? These are all grammar concepts. Most people don't know that. But like they don't know that meaning behind como estás. They don't understand the why behind there. And the reason why this matters, and this is a quote that I made, and it's super valuable, because when you understand why certain things happen, it makes more sense. And when it makes more sense, you remember it better. And this is why me and Eduardo were able to get past this grammar sort of hurdle. Most people spend years on grammar and just stuck in this grammar phase. And Eduardo was able to go past it by understanding these 3 W's and being cognizant and actually implementing these steps. This is what my course in the Speedy Spanish Academy prioritizes and teaches in the fundamentals part, and also what language transfer did, which is actually free. And so the problem with most grammar textbooks and materials is that, firstly, they're written, so they're not prioritizing the fluency equation because there's no point in a conversation where you're going to have a book open, you're going to read a script to a person. Of course not. Reading and writing is not a part of the fluency equation, so it simply doesn't make sense to teach it in that way. That's why the way I teach Spanish through my Speedy Spanish Academy is all through audible sort of digital methods, through videos and stuff. because that implements the fluency equation. But the primary reason why these textbooks aren't useful and why people don't make progress is because they don't teach the why. Because it's much more advantageous to understand the rule and a concept rather than it is to memorize, okay? And so when learning grammar, opt for audible sources, firstly, so YouTube videos, online courses, rather than textbooks. And also make sure to understand, and this is the main part, make sure to not only understand the what and the where, which most programs teach, but understand the why. Understand why certain things happen. Why is it me quedo aquí? Me quedo aquí. I stay here. Why is it like that? Why is it puedo instead of puedo? Most programs don't teach these concepts. And so teaching Eduardo that, and when Eduardo learned that through my course and language transfer, it changed so much for him because he was able to get through grammar so much faster than all these people who don't focus on this. Lastly, we're going to talk about spot and speak. And this is the exercise that he was talking about where he was writing down the topics before having conversations. So with everything so far, you would reach a conversational fluent level. But at this point, you still may make mistakes and all that. Okay. And this is what Eduardo was doing. And so the best exercise to get fluent is literally just having conversations, because the fluency equation is literally just that. You can see that the fluency equation is literally just having conversations in Spanish with real people, of course. And so that's what Eduardo did. And so what Eduardo was doing was he took the Narrate, contemplate, and he actually implemented it with natives. And he used this framework I call spot and speak, okay? Now, I didn't teach this to him directly, but the way he did it is exactly how this exercise goes. So I used to do this with real natives online, and this is also what Eduardo did. But now you can literally do this with AI because AI can have audible conversations with you. So that's also an option. So let's go through this framework, okay? The first step is to spot the areas of vocabulary that you aren't comfortable in. For example, business, cooking, telling the time, etc. At this point, what you want to do is you want to speak with natives and find those weaknesses, okay? And you're going to have basically a list of topics that you're sort of not confident in. And so the goal is to work on those topics. And this is what Eduardo did, okay? Well, he told me he would basically write down the topics of like the vocabulary and basically the topics, right? The topics that he struggled with and wanted to have conversations in. He would basically translate it using DeepL to get sort of an idea of what the conversation that he would have would look like. And obviously emulate it using Narrate, contemplate. And this way he would practice having conversations before having conversations, okay? And the way it works is you spot the weaknesses of vocabulary and then you speak it. You try to have conversations and you try practicing those topics. Meaning, what Eduardo did was he was writing down the topics that he struggled with, and then he would practice having conversations on those topics. Okay? And simply when he didn't know how to say something, he would use DeepL to translate, and he would use the tools, the fundamentals course and all that in order to find out, understand how to say sentences with those topics. And in this way, he was actually practicing having conversations with natives, but also practicing the topics and his weaknesses, okay? And so the goal is to repeat this as many times as possible until basically you can have conversations about any topic. And this is the level that Eduardo reached, I think, when it was time for our call, where he was now basically able to talk about whatever topic ever because he had already practiced those topics when he was doing spot and speak with natives beforehand, right? When we were speaking with natives and doing conversations. Now, he described that as him writing those topics down and then practicing them using Narrate, contemplate. Basically just speaking on those topics before the conversations, basically practicing almost before conversations. This way, you're basically having conversations and almost faking it until you make it. But it's not faking it because you're still having the conversation, you're just not good at it. But the way it works is you're going to suck and then you're going to suck even more. But then what's going to happen is you're going to suck so much that eventually you're going to suck so little that you're actually going to be good. And that's exactly how both my transformation and Eduardo's transformation look like. And so this exercise is basically just smushing together transcript training and Narrate, contemplate. And this is basically what you and me have been doing to learn our own native language 24/7. We've 24/7 been doing spot and speak. You found topics in your native language that you struggled with as a baby. You spoke on them and then you got better at them. And so what we're doing is we're almost doing that. And this way we're sort of emulating that. And this is the reason why thinking in Spanish is so important and the importance that Eduardo put on thinking in Spanish in your head. And this exercise is what gets that happening. In fact, this entire method, the fluency equation, is what gets you thinking in Spanish in your head. Specifically the 3 W's, specifically understanding the why. Because once you can understand the logic behind the language, you start thinking and using that logic. AKA, you start building a Spanish mind. And so those are the frameworks and methods that Eduardo used to get fluent in Spanish, okay? And according to an AI analysis of his transformation, using these frameworks and methods, he saved minimum 200 hours and upwards of 350 hours. And for me, I saved, according to an AI analysis, minimum 200 to 250 hours of time spent studying. And that's what these methods have allowed me and Eduardo to achieve. And so if you want my help to implement these frameworks and finally start learning Spanish in a clear and structured way, then check the description to join the Speedy Spanish Academy. I've been working on this school for literally the past year and upwards of the past 3 years because I had to learn Spanish, go through all that BS, and I'm finally able to present a program that I'm super proud of and actually works. And I know that it works because I've seen it work with Eduardo just now and many other people. So check the description if you're interested. Otherwise, I appreciate you watching and I hope you enjoyed this video. Stay humble.